Everybody, my name is Joe Warpeha, and I'm running for Vice President of USA Powerlifting. This recording that I'm making here today is a follow-up to something I sent out to all voting members of the NGB a little while ago, soliciting questions that I might be able to answer for people. So we'll go ahead and jump into it here. Just a little bit of a background introduction before I get to the questions. There were a total of 3 questions and 1 comment that was received. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, so that's what I got. I'm going to address each question separately. A little bit about the format here. So as you all know, or for those that might not know, because there might be people watching this video that weren't on the original list that I sent it out to, I had solicited voting members of the NGB to get their thoughts and their questions. I did this via a Google form that was anonymous, so they could submit questions and comments without me knowing who they were, and I thought that would be an advantage. I think people are more likely to ask the difficult questions if their anonymity is preserved, and so I went ahead and did that. I gave people about a week to go ahead and submit those questions and comments. In terms of other advantages of this style here, I think it's an advantage for me because I have time to actually think about the questions, give detailed responses. When I speak at the NGB meeting and give my vice president speech, I'm limited to 10 minutes, in which case I can't share a lot of details and go into a lot of background on things. This format here allows me to be able to do that. In terms of the cons, I think one of them is I don't know if everybody received the initial email that I sent out to all NGB voting members. I sent it out to their USA Powerlifting email addresses. I don't know how regularly those are checked. And with the 1 week window that I gave, that might not have been enough time for everybody to respond to that. One thing to keep in mind is you're all free to share this recording with anyone you want. It is important to note, though, that there are restrictions on where campaign materials and or endorsements can be shared. I'll go over that in the next slide. Be sure that you share these restrictions with anybody that you share this presentation with. And again, you are free to share this with anybody you want. Just make sure they're aware of those restrictions. Another, kind of going back to the pros and cons there, another con is I do have time to think about these questions, put my thoughts together, put together slides with background information or supporting information. This is not a situation where I'm standing up in front of a room and people are asking me questions and I've got to respond on the spot. You all have that opportunity at the NGB meeting if you want to take that. So that could be seen as maybe a disadvantage of this format here. So we'll jump into it. This is the message that was sent out from our secretary, Cameron Barrio. Basically, you can read what's in the red box there. And this is something that anybody running for office was made aware of. And that is endorsements or campaign materials or anything of the like cannot be posted to official USA Powerlifting accounts. That would mean these can't be shared on USA Powerlifting state Facebook group pages, etc. So again, you're free to share this information with whoever you want. Just can't go on anything that's an official USA Powerlifting website, social media, things of that nature. So I'm just putting that out there so you're all aware of that. But again, feel free to share this presentation with whoever you think needs to see it. Just be aware of the restrictions there. In full transparency, here's a screenshot of what I had when I closed out the form a week after I had opened it there. So 3 people responded. There were 3 questions, and one person who asked a question also posted a comment there. So I'm going to go through these individually, reiterate what the question was, give you my answer, and give you some supporting information for my answer. So this was the first question, and I'm just going to read these verbatim and then give you my answer. I've been a member for 15 years. During this time, the only person on the EC who I know was available at the events was the current vice president, Mr. Graham. I have seen him at every national event I have attended. We have a new president, but even at the last national event, collegiates, I'm a collegiate team coach. I only saw Mr. Graham speak, hand out awards. My question, will you be active in communicating with the members as the new vice president? So my answer simply is if elected vice president, I will attend all national championships, unless, of course, there's some extenuating circumstance that prevents it. To me, that would be an illness or death in the family. I'll be present at these events. I'll make myself available to members or anyone who wants to talk to me. And of course, I'll be available to present awards, make public addresses, attend any matter requiring the leadership of the organization if the president is unable. I do believe that the president, as the leader of the organization, has the first right of refusal on these sorts of things. But I welcome the opportunity to do all of those things that Johnny Graham has done as the vice president. Looking back over his tenure, which is 22 or 23 years, he really has been the face of the organization as the vice president. And that's not uncommon in organizations or companies for a vice president or one of the vice presidents to kind of be the public face. And rarely you hear from the president themselves. This has been the model that we've adopted for the past 20 plus years. It's up to our current leadership to decide if this model will be carried forward. I'm happy to play whatever role is asked of me. And if that is in part being, one of the faces of the organization, I happily embrace that opportunity. In terms of attending national championships, on average, over the past many years, I've probably attended 2 national championships every year. This year will be Raw Nationals and Bench Nationals. And some people might wonder, why don't we see you at every single national championship? And I'm going to answer that in a couple ways. Number one, my current role as technical committee chair, which I've had for several years, is largely a behind the scenes role, and it's something I can really do from anywhere. So on average, I put in 5 to 20 hours every single week with my technical committee chair responsibilities. That doesn't require me to be at national championships to carry out those responsibilities. Some of you probably also remember at the last NGB meeting me talking about my day job and the fact that it's very flexible and I can control my own schedule. And so the question might be, if that's the case, why aren't you at every national championship? And the context of me kind of sharing my schedule was when I was giving my presidential election speech a year ago. I had shared that my boss, I work in academia, I work at a college. My boss had said, if you were to win this position, then, you have my permission to travel as much as the position requires. I did not win that election. As a result, I've not been to all the national championships this year. I think in order for me to make the argument with my boss, who ultimately I do have to report to, it would have to be me getting into a role or a position that justifies me being gone multiple times over the course of the year. As a college professor, I'm busy in the fall, I'm busy in the spring. Summers are pretty wide open on summer break. So if elected vice president, I can tell you that I will be at all of the national championships, and that won't be a hard argument to make at my day job. So hopefully, if any of you had questions about something like that answers those questions there. I do want to talk a little bit about my record, and I'm proud of my record. And I think if there's one thing that kind of summarizes my record and the positions I've held, that is commitment and commitment to the responsibility of my job or my jobs. So I was a Minnesota State chair for 10 years between 2009 and 2019. I'm very proud of the fact that between 2006 and 2020, we held a total of 84 USA Powerlifting meets in the state of Minnesota, and I never missed a single one, not one. I was at every single one of them. I considered that my responsibility as state chair. I enjoyed doing it. It allowed me to keep my finger on the pulse of what was going on in the state. In my early years as state chair, it wasn't particularly hard to do logistically and schedule wise because we had 2 or 3 meets a year. But in the later years of my tenure, we had 15, 16, 17 meets a year. My last year as state chair, 2019, we had 17 meets in the state of Minnesota. Every single month, all 12 months of the year, we had at least one meet. Some months we had 2 meets. And I don't know if you're aware of the geography of Minnesota, but we're a bigger state, and I'm way up in the northeastern corner there on the tip of Lake Superior. The vast majority of the powerlifting events in our state are, for me, a minimum of 2.5 hours away. So that took a lot to commit to traveling to every single meet, never missing one, but that was important to me. That was my job as state chair, and I was a single state chair the entire time. I never had a co-chair. That's pretty common these days, but I was the only one for my 10-year term as state chair. As state chair, it was also my responsibility to attend the National Governing Board meeting to represent the membership in Minnesota. And as Minnesota state chair, I never missed a single NGB meeting. I think the only recent NGB meeting I missed was a few years ago, and that was there was a wedding in the family on that exact same weekend, and I had to make a decision, and I made that decision, but I also was not the Minnesota state chair at that time. EC member, I've served a couple different time periods on the EC. So I served 2 terms between 2012 and 2018. And then I came back on the EC in 2024, and I'm currently on the EC. So when I came back to the EC in 2024, by that point, the group had adopted a monthly virtual meeting. So every month, the EC would meet for 2 hours, talk about whatever was going on in the organization. I am happy to say that I've not missed a single meeting, not one. I've never been late. My camera is always on, and I understand there are reasons that people might need to have their camera off, but it's important to me that my camera's on. People know that I'm engaged in the meeting. Disabled Athletes Committee, I've been a member of that committee for the past couple of years, since 2024, when it was resurrected and kind of reimagined under the leadership of Tyler Gerfers. I've never missed a Disabled Athletes Committee meeting. I've never been late. I've always left my camera on. I will tell you that in terms of these virtual meetings, some of them are kind of tough for me to fit into a schedule, especially if I'm traveling. Sometimes I'm traveling for work, attending a professional conference, something like that. This always rises to the highest level of priority, and no matter what, I make sure I'm there. So usually I'm sitting in a hotel room tuning into these meetings. So my record is one of commitment. That's important to me. So when I tell you that I will be at the national championships, all national championships, if elected vice president, that's kind of a big statement that I'm making, but I would ask you to look to my record and what have I done in my various positions in USA Powerlifting. So that I think would wind up question number 1 there. Moving on to question number 2. How will you work to get the committees on the same page so we're all working together along with that, so that USA Powerlifting, the national office, is using their committees and involving them in decisions such as nationals and planning? How can communication and planning improve so we are not constantly changing mid-plan? So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the job responsibilities of the vice president, but probably the most long-standing responsibility of the vice president is the person who oversees all of the committees. So all of the committee chairs technically report to the vice president. There was a period of time for a few years, that was a few years ago, that this changed. And during that time period, all the committee chairs reported to the executive director. At that time, it was Priscilla Ribic. We've since reverted back to all committee chairs reporting to the vice president. The vice president really, serves as that liaison between the committees and the leadership. So just give me a little bit of background of one of the major responsibilities of the vice president. And if elected vice president, one of the things I will do is host regular virtual meetings. I mean, in this day and age, post-pandemic, Zoom is not a hard thing for most people. It's accessible for most people and allows us to stay connected across the country. So I would like to host regular meetings with the committee chairs. The regularity is to be determined. I think I would communicate with the chairs and ask them what they think is reasonable. And I would do this in a couple different formats. Number 1, I would like to have group meetings, kind of get the committee chairs together as a group to talk about things, whether they're just kind of, current things that I can share with them, what's going on within the organization. It also is a venue in which, they can share with me what's going on with their committees or general, things that maybe are concerns across multiple committees. I'd also like to get to know the various committee chairs and have individual meetings with them, just one-on-one. There might be some things they might not want to talk about in a group setting, but would be more comfortable talking with me one-on-one. So I would like to have individual meetings with committee chairs. My goal is not to be a micromanager. My goal is to be accessible. My goal is to regularly communicate. I think that's where a lot of the the problems have arisen in the organization and things that were alluded to in the question. It's been said before, not by me, but that, we as an organization are a victim of our success. And I think to a degree that's true. And I think some of the missteps we've made, and we have made missteps, are the result of, miscommunication, or, the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. So I'd like to bridge that gap as the vice president and be that person that is the liaison, that has an open channel of communication with the committee chairs, and regular communication, not just when something happens and we're working on damage control. As vice president, obviously, I'll be involved in various leadership discussions to a degree. I am as a member of the EC, but as vice president, I expect to be involved in various discussions, that some of which might involve a particular constituency of members. For example, collegiate lifters would be a constituency, and that constituency is represented by the collegiate committee, or some discussion that involves the purview of a particular committee. As the chair of the technical committee, our committee oversees the rules and referees, and maybe something's being talked about as it relates to one of those topics. But when those discussions do come up, using, my best judgment to determine when should a committee be consulted before we make any final decision on this. And honestly, I don't know if there'd be too many situations in which I wouldn't come to the conclusion that the committee should be consulted if there's some decision being made that affects either their constituency um, or their purview. So a little bit of first, just some more factual background, then a little of my experience. So if you look at the national website today, there are 17 committees listed on the national website. Some of these committees are very active, and they're going all the time. Others are relatively inactive, and that just might reflect their scope and their responsibilities. It's not necessarily a negative against the committee. They just might not have a lot of things to do on a regular basis. Some committees are very large committees with 5 to 7 plus members. The technical committee, again, would be an example of a larger committee with 7 members. Some are committees of one person runs the committee, and that's all that's needed. So that's the background in terms of the number of committees. So we have a lot of committees. I think there's a lot of communication that needs to be happening with these committees. And in terms of how committees are classified, and this is just my way of looking at it, but I think it's accurate. One of two ways. Number one, the committee is constituency based, meaning the committee represents a committee or a group of lifters. The women's committee, the military committee, the collegiate committee, the masters committee, the youth committee. Those are all committees that represent a group of the membership or a constituency. And then there are the non-constituency based committees. So the technical committee would be, a prime example of that. The technical committee doesn't represent a particular group of people. We have a purview and a responsibility that covers things like the rule book and referees, things of that nature. So in terms of these two different types of committees, I've chaired both types of committees. The Raw committee has been defunct for several years now because there hasn't really been a need to have a Raw committee. So we voted to dissolve that committee several years ago. That was a constituency-based committee. That committee represented Raw lifters in the organization. I'm also currently the chair of the technical committee. That's a non-constituency-based committee. And between the two, I've been a committee chair for a combination of, in total 15 years, about an equal number of years between the two, about 7 or 8 years apiece. And I can tell you, having chaired those committees going way back, I've experienced the frustration when decisions are made that impact either my committee or the constituency of my committee without consulting the committee, or at the very least informing us in advance of any announcement. So I've been on the receiving end of that many times. There's no need to go into details about that, but that is very frustrating. And I think those sorts of things are entirely preventable. And it comes back to communication, maintaining open lines of communication, and having regular communication. I think that will solve a lot of our problems. Sadly, a lot of our problems are self-inflicted, but the good news is I think there are pretty easy solutions to those problems, and I hope to be a major part of that solution. So I think that wraps up my answer to question number 2. Question number 3 in your VP letter. So this was the letter that I submitted officially, letter of intent. you said you're an innovator. Can you describe some of the innovations you have contributed? I'm going to answer this question by way of some examples of times that I was an innovator in several positions that allowed me to be an innovator, meaning when you're the chair of a state or a committee, you kind of have the power to be able to put some of these ideas into motion. So those examples are going to come from my role as the Minnesota State Chair for many years, RAW Committee Chair. My current role is Technical Committee Chair, and then an other category that I'll have one example to it. So just so we're all on the same page of what innovation means, how it's defined, I'll just go to the second, more concise definition down below, the introduction of something new. So you think about innovations in USA powerlifting. Some people automatically think of technical or technological innovations, and certainly there are examples of that if you look at lifting cast, created by Mike Sampson. I don't know that we run any meets these days without lifting cast. That's been a major innovation. And prior to lifting cast, there was Joe Mark Steiner's Next Lifter. And that goes back several years before that. But I remember the days when we didn't have these scoring programs. We did things by hand. And it's amazing what that innovation has done. If we think about the DRL lights, those lights where you use the remote control and the lights pop up, the color cards below. That was a major technical innovation created by Scott Dobbins out of Texas. That really changed the way we did things because no longer did we have to worry about cords and taping down cords from the light box to the controllers in the hands. That was a major hassle for meet directors. Those are examples of innovations. On the non-technical side of innovations, you think about something like prime time. For anybody that's been a member for the past, you've joined in the past 8 or 9 years, prime time has always been around at certain meets, Raw Nationals being a prime example of that. No pun intended. We have Josh Orr to thank for the introduction of prime time, and that goes back, 10 plus years ago where he put this idea out there and let's try this prime time thing. And I think that's been wildly popular. So those are examples of innovations. I want to talk about some of the things that I've done. I don't know that any of these, will rise to the level of some of the examples I've given, maybe one or two, but I want to share some of these with you. So I'm going to start with things I did as a Minnesota State Chair. So I began my first term in 2009, and a little bit of history on raw lifting and USA powerlifting. So the first Raw Nationals was 2008, and we had just voted to create this new division called, the Raw division, a year before that or so. And so raw lifting was really in its infancy in 2009, but I could see the interest being sparked. I could see more people being curious about what is this new division, this new type of lifting. So one of the first things I did as state chair is I created a meet. I had never been a meet director before. I thought as a state chair, it's important that I understand the role of meet directing. And so I created the event. I hosted it in my hometown of Duluth, Minnesota. And I ran the first meet in a very small CrossFit gym that was owned by a good friend of mine. And it was tight. It was hot, but it was simple to kind of get it done the first year. After that first year, I moved into the venue that you can see. The picture below there, that's a field house, much larger venue. And for the first several years, 50 lifters, thereabouts, something like that. But it increased in popularity. And by the end of it, the 10th year, which was 2018, I capped it at 100 lifters. And I sold that meet out in under 7 minutes, 100 spots. The only other event I was aware at that time of selling out faster would have been some of the Arnold events. There was nothing fancy. There was nothing flashy about my events. I wasn't giving out thousands of dollars. But when people see that logo that you can see there, and that's the logo I created for the event, and it's the logo I used all those years, it's kind of symbolic of some things in the port city of Duluth, Minnesota, that meant something to people. It meant I know the meet's going to start on time. I know the meet's going to be run well. I know when I have a question for the meet director, he's going to respond to me. Those are important things. I think those are the things that lifters think a lot about, and some people overlook. I think the basics are still really important. So I'm very proud of that event that I ran for 10 years. But I think at the time, it was an innovation. There were people that were critical of it, didn't think it was a good idea. But I said, why not give it a try and let's see what happened? And it turned out to be wildly successful as an event, and I'm very proud of that. One thing as state chair, and those of you as state chairs know, you get regular membership reports, how many members in the organization, how many members in your state, and all different ways to kind of break those things down into subcategories. And something I noticed probably around 2014, 2015, because I would read those reports every single month. I would look at things like how many females versus males do we have as members in the state. And it was very obvious that there was an uptick in female members. I mean, this was happening across the country, but it was happening at a much greater rate in the state of Minnesota. And I can't necessarily explain it. There wasn't anything that I did that caused that to happen. But I witnessed that happening, and I thought to myself, maybe we should create a women's only meet. Maybe that would be popular because at the time we were sitting probably in the low 40%, like 42, 43% of our members in the state were females. This was much higher than the national average. So I thought maybe we should try a women's only meet. Would that be well received? But I didn't want to assume that I knew best, especially as somebody that does not come from that constituency or group of members. I didn't just want to create the meet and assume that I knew what female lifters in the state wanted. So before I did anything, I talked to a couple people who I thought were good representatives of the female lifter community in Minnesota, and asked, what do you think about this? What do you think that the female lifters in Minnesota will think about this? Because I could have seen it going, well, they're not going to like it because they're going to feel singled out and separated from the men, and this probably won't go over well. So I knew that was a possibility, which is why I wanted to ask the question. But when I asked the people who I thought were good, representatives of the female lifting population in Minnesota, it was the opposite. It was, I think they'll think this is the coolest thing in the world. I think they'll love it. They'll love the identity that's created with it and the culture that comes along with that. And so I asked one of our meet directors in Minnesota, somebody who I thought would do a really good job of running this meet. What do you think about running this meet? I can remember exactly where I was. I was in the Champlain Park High School gymnasium. We're running a meet, and I pulled him aside. I said, what do you think about running this meet here? And I proposed, what about Ladies of Iron for the title? And he said, well, I like Women of Steel better. I said, fine, go with it. That's great. That's the logo there you can see on your screen. We ran this event the first time in July 2016. We had 58 lifters. Importantly, and I did a little bit of research on this at the time, I could find no other event in USA Powerlifting going way, way back that was a female only event with the exception of women's nationals, which for those of you that are new to the organization, the past 10 or 12 years, you've never seen a women's nationals. That's because 2014 was the last year we ran a women's nationals as a standalone event. Thereafter, we rolled it in and combined men's and women's nationals. So aside from women's nationals, there was no event that I was aware of that was a women's only event. So I thought this could be a really cool thing. This could be an innovative sort of idea. It was wildly popular in Minnesota. We ran that for 3 years, 2016, 17, and 18. Ray Law was the meet director for all three of those. And thereafter, we see the evolution of the Ladies of Iron nationwide event that I think many of you are probably familiar with today. I don't know if what we did in Minnesota, the Women of Steel event, was the inspiration for the Ladies of Iron. Um, I just know that we started it all here in 2016. Um, and I'm very proud of what we did in Minnesota. So I consider that another innovation and something new that turned out to be successful. Another thing in my role as Minnesota State Chair, we had never had any significant high school representation or participation that I was aware of. And I got to thinking about it, being next door neighbors to Wisconsin, which, historically has been one of the national models for high school powerlifting, and they go back to the 1980s. They're a relatively small state in terms of population of people, but they have an enormous population of high school lifters and a high school powerlifting association. And I thought, we're right next door to one of the biggest high school states in the country. Why don't we give this a try? And so I said, why not? What do we have to lose? So I created the first ever Minnesota high school state championship. I directed it myself the first couple of years. We ran that in 2017. I think we had 50 to 60 lifters the first couple of years. That meet still continues today. We still have a Minnesota high school state championship. So I'm proud of that contribution as well, trying something new on the high school side of things. As a Minnesota State chair, I also created our first true state website. I mean, we had some websites before that, but nothing I think that rose to the level of what I created in terms of our website. Anybody that knows me is never going to call me a technology guy. And those of you that know me are listening to this, you're chuckling to yourselves right now. But it's not a hard thing for me to adapt to what the needs are. And so I saw this as a need. I wanted a state website that was one-stop shopping. Everything was right in one place for the membership there. So I hired somebody to create it, to build the shell, and teach me how to use it, how to update it, how to make changes, add whatever I needed to do, and that really wasn't hard to do. That image you see on your website there, that's what our state website looked like when I created it there. And again, it's meant to be one-stop shopping. That search bar across the top meant to be virtually everything any member would need right at their fingertips. So it's all in one place. They don't have to go to 3 or 4 different websites to find the information they want. I created the first ever Minnesota State Facebook page. These are things today that I think most people take for granted. Every state has their own website. Every state has their own Facebook page. Years ago, that was not the case. Several of them did, but not all of them did. And if you wanted it to happen, you had to do it yourself. So I bought the domain name USAPL Minnesota, paid for that and whatever the hosting services were, and that was our state website for many years. I'm very proud of that innovation. So I think that probably winds up what I did as state chair. As RAW committee chair, there were a lot of things going on. We had a lot of work to do on the RAW committee as RAW was really taking hold in the initial few years. And one thing that I noticed, and I tried to keep track of the data, and this was all easy stuff to look up on the national website, but you can see at the bottom there, very first Raw Nationals in 2008, first 2 years we had about 160 some lifters in Raw Nationals. And then we dropped down a little bit in 2010. And a lot of this is geography. A lot of times when we go out to the West, our national meets, at least historically, are not as well attended as like the Northeast. I think that's probably changed today, but that wasn't necessarily an indication the popularity was dropping. But we see in 2011 a huge jump, more than double what the highest attended Raw Nationals had been to date. And so I was the first one to propose, and I did this at the 2012 NGB meeting, that Raw Nationals have qualifying totals and meaningful qualifying totals, not a total in a meet. And it was voted down almost unanimously, 24-4, rejected by the NGB. In those first several years, there was a major kind of philosophical struggle about Raw Nationals, and do we want to just be this huge national event? We're going to call it a national event. There aren't going to be significant qualifying totals, so we can have these huge meets, versus the other side of the argument. If it's a national championship, then it should be a pretty high bar to get to that national championship. And we struggled with that for many years, people on both sides of the argument. But, we got to the point where, Raw Nationals absolutely exploded. And just like logistically and practically speaking, we couldn't allow it to get much bigger. And that explosion happened in 2015 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. when we had about 1,000 lifters, and that was a major jump up from any previous Raw Nationals. And I think that's when we started to get pretty serious about the qualifying totals and ramping those up to basically, contain the numbers. But that took several years. It took a lot of persistence. It took a lot of patience to actually get to that point. Um, so I consider that to be a contribution, though it wasn't my proposal in 2012 that finally got it to stick. I think that's where the discussion, in an official sense, got started there. Most of you watching this now probably know me best as a technical committee chair, because that's what I've done for the past several years. And if somebody were to ask me, what's your most significant contribution to USA powerlifting? It's easy for me to answer that question. I think the rule book and what I did with the rulebook overhaul is easily what I consider the most significant contribution. It's also easily what was the greatest amount of time and workload that went into that. It was over, I estimate, at least 200 hours of work. And it doesn't seem like it should be that much for an 80-some page document in Microsoft Word, but anybody that's worked with Microsoft Word knows all the frustrations that come with making it look just the way you want it to look in terms of formatting, et cetera. There were also lots of discussions that had to happen on multiple levels, the technical committee, the executive committee. And so this is a bullet point list of what, when I proposed the rulebook overhaul, which was several years before 2023, these were my goals. This is what I wanted to achieve. And the first one actually wasn't initially one of the goals because we were still part of the IPF. But as we got closer to 2023, when the new rulebook rolled out, then we weren't part of the IPF. So that was one of the major goals, was eliminate all the references, rules, and policies to any international affiliate. Because those of you who've been around for a little while know what the rulebook looked like prior to 2023. And it was basically um, it was a rule book that encompassed all the IPF rules. As an IPF member nation, we're supposed to be verbatim in lockstep with the IPF on rules, but there were some things that exceptions were made. We did things differently at a national level or the local level because those situations simply didn't apply in the IPF and they didn't really care. So we had this weird kind of amalgamation of it's an IPF rule book, but it's also USA Powerlifting rule book. And it got to be very frustrating kind of patchwork and kind of workarounds to still be in the good graces of the IPF, following their rules, but also having it be something that's workable for us in USA Powerlifting. So that was one of the things we cut out right away, was just get rid of anything related to the international level. This is the USA Powerlifting Rulebook for USA Powerlifting sanctioned competition. One of the major things I wanted to achieve was to get the rulebook in what's called a hierarchical numerical outline. So basically, every single item or section in the rulebook has some number associated with it. This is pretty common in a lot of other sports rule books. And this is something that the first rule book that made me think about this, I took my USA weightlifting club coach certification in 2003, I think, and you got a copy of the rule book, USA Weightlifting's rule book, and they had that in that hierarchical numerical outline. So I kind of used that as my kind of first example. And as I went to look at other sporting rule books, a lot of others kind of did the same way. But I think any that it's read the rule book would agree it's a lot easier to just cite or reference a number in a rule book instead of a page number, and it's like the last paragraph on the second page, and that page number is going to change when different versions come out. So that was a major change in the rule book. There were plenty of problems that had built up over time in the rule book, things that were inconsistent, ambiguous, terms that could be interpreted different ways. Um, Unnecessary redundancy. We didn't need the same thing showing up in 3 different places in the rule book. Wording, a lot of the wording and some of the wording we did have to keep verbatim from the IPF, in particular the technical rules of performance for the 3 lifts. And I think that some of that ambiguity or confusion with some of those words, it came from 2 sources. Number one, some of the people who wrote, that wording that we were using verbatim might not have been English speakers, meaning like their native language was English. English was their second language. And so some things were lost in translation. The other thing is, I think some of the people that wrote some of those earlier versions of the IPF rulebook probably shouldn't have been the ones writing it because of the way ambiguities and confusion arose from the words they chose for certain things. So the goal was to fix all that, kind of start with a clean slate. Um, and then the second to last bullet point, people have been referees for a long time. You can think back to years ago where there were certain things that we knew this is a rule, we know this is the way it's done, but it's not written anywhere. So how are our newer referees supposed to know what are the rules if some of these rules are unwritten rules? And if you've been a referee long enough, then you know it's a rule. That was a big problem. So the goal was, if it's a rule, we put it in the rule book. If it's not in the rule book, it's not a rule. So there are a lot of little gaps that were filled in with this big overhaul. And then finally, some rules just needed to change. So our rule book was just kind of one iteration after another that maybe went back to the last overhaul that would have been around 2007, 2008, somewhere around there was the last time we had a big major overhaul. I was not involved with it at that time, but some rules just needed to be changed, and so those were changed. So I set out to do all of this. The technical committee, reviewed, gave feedback. When the final version was ready to be released, I had a 4-hour meeting with the EC. People who are watching this that were on the EC then remember that was a grueling meeting. It was long. It was very detail oriented, but the EC needed to weigh in all of this if we were actually going to be changing certain rules. So I do consider the rule book to be my biggest contribution. I think it has been well received. I'm a perfectionist, but I know that 80-some page document will never be perfect. So we're always working to shore it up and make it as good as we can. But I think we have a pretty good product out there, and I'm happy to have played a major role in that. So other things I did as technical committee chair. One of the first things I did when I came on board in that role was I saw some limitations and some flaws with our referee exams. And back then, those were paper and pencil exams. They were administered at national championships or state championships, whatever, for state referees. And it appeared to me kind of like the rule book is this has been the exam forever and ever, and we haven't really changed with the times. And so I completely rewrote them, started from scratch, 100 questions each. And in all fairness, it wasn't 200 unique questions. There are some questions that are on both exams, but that is something that I think plays to my experience as a college professor, and somebody has to write a lot of exam questions. And if those questions are flawed, you hear about it from 30 or 40 people when the test is over. So I think I've got a good eye for that. I wrote the questions. I had them reviewed by several people, some of whom, were also, professors who had to, write, questions regularly. Some were longtime experts on the rules, so they could look at these through multiple different lenses. So anybody that's taken the referee exam in the past, 6 or 7 years, you've seen the new exam. We never had a referee requirements or procedures manual. I thought that was a problem. A big part of my personality is I'm a systems builder. I'm a process person. I want things to make sense. I want things to be efficient. That was part of what the rulebook overhaul was about. It's also, what the referee requirements and procedures manual is about. Let's put it all into writing. Here it is. Here's everything. Here's the requirements. Here's the procedure. So that anybody had a question about anything related to taking referee exam, chances are pretty good it's somewhere in that manual for them. It was the one that first suggested that we try virtual administration of national and higher written exams. And this was not a result of the pandemic. I mean, a lot of things, that have persisted after pandemic that are like related to, virtual sorts of communication. We learned how to do it during the pandemic. We decided to keep it. This had nothing to do with that. I just saw this as an increased efficiency, because when we were giving paper and pencil tests at national championships, that tied up someone or some people who had to sit there and proctor those exams. And then if that person didn't pass the exam, they couldn't take their practical. So it really screwed up the technical secretaries, and their scheduling of who's going to take their exams and who's going to be their proctors. So now the written exam is taken well in advance of any meet, national or otherwise, that somebody's, taking, for example, their national referee exam at, and we know well in advance. Well, they took their written exam 2 weeks out. They didn't pass it. they're not going to be taking their exam at this meet, or they did, they're good to go. You don't have to wonder, right up until the meet, are they going to pass? Am I going to need to schedule them, or am I not? And so I piloted this. I got permission from then executive director Priscilla Ribic to try this. It was something that, as a college professor that went through the pandemic, I learned all about Zoom. I got to be, you know, good enough with it that I felt very comfortable, using it in this manner. And I piloted it with somebody from Minnesota. It was very successful, and the rest is history. And that's what we've done it ever since. And we're somewhere between 200 and 300 exams, national or higher, that have been administered this way. And I think it's a huge efficiency for everybody. I created several application processes, official application processes. So I've gotten really good with Jotform now, and how to create those applications. Again, systems are important to me, systems that make sense, that are organized, that are efficient, that reflect the processes that are needed. And so I created several different applications. We always had a system for, you want to take your national exam, but that system was email the technical or referee committee person, and it goes back and forth by email. I wanted something that there'd be a paper trail, there'd be a record. Everybody is providing all the same information that then goes and gets, fact checked. You have the right number of meets, et cetera. So that's another thing, that if you've applied to be a national or higher referee in the past several years, you've gone through the same application process that everybody else went through. In 2020, we rolled out the adaptive athlete and para bench divisions. So we had to create applications for that, standardized, way that people that want to be in these divisions could apply for. Technical secretaries have been a thing at national championships for a long time. When we rolled out regional championships around 2016-ish, we needed technical secretaries for them. So we didn't always have a formal application process. Now we do. Religious and medical exemptions are other things that people have requests for, some kind of, exemption for, the personal apparel requirements or something like that. It's all standardized. It's all in an application. It's all now a matter of a record that lives in that application forever. And then going back to the adaptive athlete and para bench divisions, I wasn't the one who proposed creating those divisions. That came from the leadership of the organization. And it was Priscilla Ribic, executive director, reached out to me. We decided that we're going to create these divisions. We're going to offer these divisions. As a technical committee chair, can you write up, the description, the requirements, basically, create all the nuts and bolts behind these divisions. And so, I did that, and I think that was 2020. And so that, I think, winds out, as technical committee chair, some of the innovations, some of the things that I rolled out. And again, I often look at a situation and I ask myself, does this work? Can it work better? And these are all reflections of some of which that, we've had processes in place for a long time. But as I analyze a situation, I thought this could work better. And I'm willing to put in the work to improve that process. So a lot of my recent contributions have come as technical committee chair. And the last thing here, and then we can move on, is the other category. I've always been a fan of history, and I've always tried to learn about the history of our sport. I mean, my involvement in powerlifting goes back to 1997. As a college student, my involvement in USA Powerlifting goes back to 1999. And so I've not lived through, a large chunk of the history of the sport of powerlifting, which goes back to 1965. If anybody was to pick a date, that would be the date. And so I found myself just personally curious about it. And then when we were, kind of rolling out the USA Powerlifting coaching certification course, one of the, when that was first rolled out there, I was asked, can you write up just kind of a brief little, synopsis of the history of the sport? We think this would be good for people taking the class to know and be familiar with. And so that morphed into, over many years and a lot of research, a 19-page single-spaced document with 72 references. Not for the coaching manual, but just this was a personal interest to me, and I couldn't find anywhere, and I looked really hard, that a fairly comprehensive history of the sport, not a book length, history, but something that was, more than just a couple paragraphs on a website somewhere. It didn't exist. I was really surprised there was nothing like that. So I set out to try and put some of the pieces together. And in full disclosure, I'm not a historian. I'm not a sport historian. The topic is of great interest to me. And so I said, nobody else has done it. Why not do it? And that was 2015. And I intentionally didn't publish it in an academic journal because I wanted to be something that was, freely accessible to anybody who wanted to read it. And journals can be fairly predatory in terms of what they charge you to buy an article or read an article. I wanted this to be freely available to anybody who wanted to read it, and so it's out there. If you look at my USA Powerlifting resume, that's linked in my letter of intent. You'll see it's at the very bottom. It's linked. I do encourage all of you to read it just to kind of get up to speed with our sport. It's been a very interesting history of our sport going back to the beginning there. So I do consider that to be an innovation in terms of it's something new. It's something that hadn't been done on this scale before. And I'm very proud of that contribution. There was one comment in addition to the three questions. I'll read it and then I'll talk about it and then we'll wind it up. Things seem to get launched without committee or state chair input. It seems rushed and things keep changing. Athletes feel they are chasing a moving goal line. State chairs are being asked to do a lot, but not a lot of support from the national office. Example, can we create a meet director certification or training? We are asked to approve sanctions, but not put on restrictions. But then it looks like we're gatekeeping when we know these people don't have the experience or knowledge to run a meet. So my answer to that is much the same as my answer to question number two, but question number two centered more on committee chairs and the frustration of maybe a lack of communication or not being consulted. I do consider this to be a similar situation. And my answer to that is what I would like to do as vice president is get to know all the state chairs. I know that's a huge task with, 51 state chairs if we count District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. It'll take some time to do that, but in many of the state chairs I already know, but many I don't. And I'd like to get to know the state chairs. I want to hear directly from the state chairs. What are the problems in their state? And I think important to solving the problem is there an origin story to this? Is there a history? A lot of our states have very long histories of powerlifting in the state, USA Powerlifting, particular personalities, multiple organizations kind of, battling it out in the state. So I think that helps kind of understanding what's a lay of the land, what's kind of the history of the state, if the state chair is aware of something like that. What has been working well? Let's continue to do that. How can we build on what's been working well? What hasn't been working well? Why hasn't been working well? How can we change course to try and improve it or fix it? And finally, what do you need? What help do you need? What resources do you need from the national office and from leadership? So what I would set out to do is work with the chair of the state chair committee. For many years, that's been Dana Snow, a friend of mine, and I would like to work with Dana to help improve the communications between the state and national level. I do believe in the chain of command, and I believe that as a state chair, Dana Snow is the first person that state chair should be reaching out to. But I want to, lend my assistance in any way that it would be helpful to the chair of the state chair committee, to the state chairs. I think there have been group meetings where all, state chairs, anybody can attend. There's a virtual meeting, and that was, led by the chair of the state chair committee. I would love to be invited to those meetings, just kind of be a fly on the wall and listen to what's going on and then provide, any input or any feedback that I have. So my experience, I've already alluded to the fact that I was a state chair for 10 years. And believe me when I tell you, I understand the challenges. Having been a state chair for many years, I was also the chair of a state that experienced major growth during my tenure as state chair. So I started in January 2009, the year before I was elected state chair. We had 58 members in Minnesota, and we had 2 annual meets on the calendar. My last year as state chair, 2019, we had 796. Yes, I wish there would have been 4 more members to hit 800, but 796 was the final count. And we had 17 meets if we include the regional championship that was also held in Minnesota that year. I understand the grind, the logistics, the customer service requirements of being a meet director. I haven't directed 100 plus meets like some people, and maybe even some people listening to this recording have directed, but I've directed 20 plus meets. I understand what goes into running those meets, running a good meet. I do believe as an organization, we are a customer service organization. If we do not put out a good product, people will go other places. If we don't have good customer service skills, people will go other places. They have choices. They have many choices in many states. So I think we do need to see ourselves as customer service oriented. And I get that. And I get what goes into running meets. I'll tell you that the most stressful uh, 8 day period I can remember as state chair was I'm up in northeast Minnesota. We were running a new meet. I was running it down in Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic in southeast Minnesota. So on Friday, I loaded up my trailer with everything I needed to run a meet, drove down there, set it up in this new place we never run a meet in before. I was there pretty late. I slept on the couch in the gym. I used their shower, ready to go first thing next morning, ran the meet. I think it was a successful meet. It was a relatively small meet. Drove up to the Twin Cities, parked my trailer, flew to IPF Worlds where I refereed during the week, and then came back and ran our Twin Cities Open, which historically has been our biggest meet in Minnesota, 2 platforms. I don't know how many lifters. It was over 100 lifters, 110, 120 lifters did that on that Saturday. So in that span of time, I think I was pushed to my limits, but I know what goes into running the meets. It's a grind. It's often a thankless job. Um, so I get that. And as state chairs, you might be also meet directors. Many of you are. Those of you that aren't, you're in charge of overseeing meet directors, bringing up new meet directors, creating a culture in your state among meet directors. So I think that's important, and I do bring that lens of looking at things from the meet director perspective as well. The final note here is in my day job I'm a faculty member, so I teach, but I'm also a college department head and I oversee a master's program and an undergraduate program. So in my job as a department chair, I'm in this weird kind of in-between world where I'm the connection between the leadership. So basically, my boss is the dean, and it goes dean, vice president, president up the line, and then below me would be program director and faculty members, et cetera. So I am the interface as a department chair. All department chairs are at my institution and many others. So I'm that bridge. So as state chairs, you are the bridge between the grassroots and on the ground in the trenches, the bridge between that and the leadership that, maybe makes the decisions, charts the larger course for the organization. So I get that in terms of like what I do in my day job. That's also the role of a state chair. But also, I would see that as my role if elected vice president. I would see that as my responsibility, as kind of that connection there, whether it's between committee chairs and the leadership, state chairs, via the chair of the state chair committee. I'm that connection. I'm that interface, and I want to be that, and I want to bring my skill set, my experience to try and fix some of these problems, these missteps that some of you have alluded to, whether it's in the questions that were asked here or I've heard these things in other places. So I want to help. As I said before, we're kind of a victim of our own success, and I want to play a role in getting it right. And I think we have everything we need to do that. I think all the right people are in place. It comes down to, I think, maybe some communication breakdown, which the good news is I think that's a pretty easy problem to solve. So in closing, I do hope you feel comfortable reaching out to me if you have questions, comments, concerns. I'd love to talk to you and hear your thoughts, whether you're a committee chair and you represent a group of lifters, a constituency, you're an athletes rep, you represent the athletes, you're a state chair, you oversee a state, or an executive committee member who I know all of you pretty well, but still would love to talk to you if you've got thoughts, questions, concerns. Over the phone, Zoom is pretty easy for most people these days, and I know we're getting close to nationals, so I would love to talk to you in person in Lombard, Illinois. In 2 weeks, I'll be there the whole time. Masters Nationals. youth, Raw Nationals, all of them. I'll be there straight through to the NGB meeting. And just kind of a final note to all of the voting NGB meeting, all the NGB voting members. If you won't be attending the NGB meeting and sometimes things come up and you can't be there, I strongly encourage you to proxy your vote. You have a vote for a reason. You represent, many of you represent a group of people. You're their voice. Please proxy your vote. There's a process for that that I'll share with you. Make sure your feelings and opinions have been shared with your proxy. I don't recommend that you just send your proxy to the meeting and let them figure it all out. Kind of share with them what you think, whether it's rules proposals and how you would vote, or elections, vice president, executive committee, etc. This was sent out from Cameron Barrio, our secretary. All voting members should have received this in the meeting notice. These are basically the steps and the link that you would use to assign a vote proxy. So encourage you to take advantage of that. Your deadline is June 10th. And with that, I'll wrap it up by saying thank you for listening to this. This allowed me to kind of go in more depth and detail than I'll be able to do in my 10-minute speech at the NGB meeting. So with that, I will say thank you.